Hi everyone, this is Keith with the Anxious Mammal. This is, I think, presentation number 7 of the 13-part trauma series on the evolution of trauma from inception to intervention. Um, Last time we talked about the inception of trauma, so where it starts in the beginning, how it begins. And now we're going to talk about how trauma continues to impact the individual in our lives negatively over the course of the remainder of their life. So this will have some information about some of the symptoms that we see, some of the other collateral damage that kind of occurs from this, etc. So let's get going. So first off, we want to identify some of the main things that we see happen commonly with people who have dealt with serious trauma. One is that labile mood or unpredictable mood can become very common. Their mood can seem to change very quickly, and it can be very intense, or it can be very dulled and blunted. Now, I want to be clear, not all of these are not, generalizations. If somebody has trauma, it doesn't mean they have labile mood or other issues that we discuss. These are just some of the common things that we see occur in many individuals that experience trauma, whether they have some, none, or all of these. Coping skills are difficult. They Those who have serious trauma can often develop negative coping skills. So things that work in the moment, like drinking, substance use, anger, I mean anything from sex, gambling, food, they work in the moment, but they cause long-term issues physically, mentally, socially, emotionally. So there's an increase in this reliance on these negative coping behaviors because they tend to work immediately, whereas the longer term coping skills like treatment, mindfulness, meditation, all these other things, they take time. And sometimes people don't have time. They don't feel like they can deal with that. Isolation. This is a common experience of people who have trauma. This can be because not only they're dealing with the symptoms that they're dealing with, and so it's difficult for them to interact with people in the environment, but also they may isolate because they're afraid of their own behaviors. They don't want to scare people or worry people, or they don't want people to perceive them as, dangerous or weird or anything like that. So they might isolate due to these behaviors and not feel like they can take care of just normal everyday daily tasks. This leads to a lack of social support and social interaction, which is going to be negatively impacting many different areas in their life. Stigma. This is a pretty common thing. So they experience social barriers due to the stigma that is placed on people with PTSD. Those with PTSD are often thought to be, which is not necessarily true. It's a stereotype. Some of these things can be true, but they're thought to be dangerous, out of control, scary, waiting to explode. There's a lot other stereotypes that we can think of that are out there, but the um, the stereotype of that they are unstable and dangerous is not necessarily true in a lot of cases. And so this is something that they face and they have to deal with, and they deal with, everyday people. Where do they get their information about what PTSD is? They get it from shows, movies, TV, which is wildly inaccurate, and it's often, most often, the shows are created by individuals who have no knowledge of PTSD and no concern for representing it appropriately. And then lastly is physical health. High anxiety means release of cortisol, adrenaline, all these other chemicals, which I've equated in analogies before with, it's like having your car, your engine. It's like getting in your car, putting it in neutral, and then revving the engine. The engine's not going to last as long. Or, if race cars and using nitrous oxide to get that burst of energy for 30 to 60 seconds. That's okay in those short bursts. That's helpful. But if you keep pumping nitrous oxide through the engine's going to end up breaking down. Same thing with your body. Those chemicals that you have are meant to be experienced in short-term bursts for survival, not long-term. And when you have them long-term, they result in numerous physical symptoms. So this is what I call the ABCs of trauma, but really ABC can help you understand everything all day in life. So this is based off of REBT, which is Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. So first you have A. We're going to look at it from the trauma lens, but first you have A, which is an activating event, or other people may know it as a trigger. This doesn't have to be negative. Triggers are not inherently negative. A trigger just means something that influences you in some way through your sensations, externally, etc. So what's going on is anything that you can see, hear, touch, taste, or smell is going to be a possible activating event or trigger. There's a misspelling here. So this says fear. It's supposed to be here, but I guess that works too. But it's your senses. We also put think, right? Some people deal with psychosis or distorted thoughts. So these internal influences can add to these external sensations coming in. So things coming from the environment typically are an activating event. So once you have A, you have B, and B is the belief that you have about these incoming sensory inputs information. So the individual perceives the trigger, the activating event, or the information to have some sort of meaning. This is going to be influenced by past experiences, past trauma, all kinds of different things. And then after the activating event and the person having a perception of what they believe those events mean, there is now a consequence to this. And that is an emotional response that determines a behavioral action. So, activating event, something happens. B, you have a belief. Consequence, there's an emotion that then drives a behavior. Rational emotive behavior therapy, if you want to look into this more, I use this a lot with my clients to help them understand just everyday processes. So here's an example of this to kind of make sure it's very clear. John and Jan both head to the conference room for a training that's being offered by their agency. Both arrive within a few minutes of one another and run into their supervisor. So they both arrive just a few moments from each other, and they both run into the supervisor. The supervisor sees John and says, "It's going to be a good presentation, a lot of good info, so make sure you pay attention." As he is about to enter the presentation room, this is, what she says to him. Jan arrives just a couple minutes after John, and she enters the room, and the supervisor offers the same suggestion. John stands at the back of the room and is withdrawn and annoyed. Jan sits at the front and is eager and engaged. So they both experienced the same. They arrived to the same conference about the same time, ran into the same supervisor who gave them the same exact advice. And why is John and why is Jan acting the way that they are? So A is the supervisor says it's going to be a good presentation, a lot of info, make sure you pay attention. The consequence is John stands at the back of the room, and the consequence for Jan is she sits up front, eager and engaged. So the understanding of why the behavior is what it is, and also the power to change that behavior is B. John perceives the supervisor as trying to micromanage by saying, it's good info, you need to pay attention. He's, and assumes that the supervisor thinks he's incompetent. He might have had an interaction with somebody previously, or with the supervisor previously, or with his wife or his kids or his friends the day before or the day of, and where he felt criticized. And so that's kind of at the front of his mind. So his belief is the supervisor is criticizing me. Jan's belief is the supervisor is taking an interest in her and appreciates her being engaged with her staff. So Jill, I changed the name. See, these are the things you guys got to call me out on. So Jan perceives that her supervisor was taking an interest, and she appreciates, that her supervisor is so engaged. So the only reason why the consequence is different for John and Jan, or Jill apparently, is because of B. John perceives the supervisor as micromanaging and thinking he's incompetent. Jill perceives the supervisor as being interested, helpful, and engaged. So that changes their emotion, which drives their behavior. From rational to activated. So this is the process that occurs from going to just kind of calm, collected, to this anxious or trauma response. You have a present event plus you have unconscious activating events. So you have things from your unconscious like beliefs about yourself or beliefs because people have told you that you're no good, you're not going to make it, you're not smart enough, whatever those are. And it doesn't always have to be negative, but we're talking about the negative side of this. So the present event, and then you have the unconscious activating events that are going on behind the scenes of that present event. Then you have your past trauma network that's activated. So in the moment, you have sensory input. You have unconscious beliefs that impact your belief system about the incoming information. So the A is impacted by B, which is coming from unconscious events also. And you also activate that trauma network that is stuck in the active memory, which we discussed at our previous presentation. So you have this trauma memory that's stuck in your active memory that your brain thinks is still happening. You're still feeling the sensations. You still have the negative belief. And if you have information that connects and your brain thinks this reminds me of this, then boom, it's activated. The example we gave before for anybody who missed it was you're walking down the street, nice neighborhood, nice sunny day, no threats around, it's actually pretty empty. All of a sudden you start having a panic attack. Well, it's possible that maybe out of the corner of your eye, you noticed that there was a bright blue door on this business and you thought, oh, that's interesting. It's very bright. And your brain said, what? Bright blue? Your trauma memories are right there in your active memory waiting for you to have a reason to activate them. So your brain says bright blue, like the eyes that you noticed on that guy who assaulted you 10 years ago. Boom, the trauma memory is activated. Your brain and your body think you are in danger at that moment again because the memory was never able to be downloaded into long-term memory, which lets it know that this is just information. This is not present occurrences. So now you're stuck in that trauma again. And this equals stress in the present moment. But when you add unconscious activating events, that can turn you into fight or flight. And then when you activate the past trauma network, that can actually send you into the freeze response, which is the animalistic, at our core, last-ditch survival effort. This is a concept we had mentioned, we've talked about recently in the last or the previous presentation, the window of tolerance. This is an important concept for you to understand, to really understand what's going on with you throughout the day. So if you look here at the window of tolerance, this is where you want to be. If we could stay here all day, life's good, okay? Now, when you get activated and you become angry or excited or anxious or whatever, it starts to go up here and then you come back down to normal because it calms, right? You go to Disneyland and get happy, or you're late for work, but then you get there just in time, or the boss is late, so you're okay. You know, your friend calls and says, I have to cancel my event, so you're not going to see him, you know, but then you're like, okay, well, I can see him again, so it's okay, and you start to come back up. That's what goes on with people who are not dealing with other factors, okay? Now, here's what it looks like for somebody who's in the, range of acceptable, they're able to cope with what's going on, right? So here their friend canceled on them, so they're sad, and here they're late for work, but then when they get there, they find out their boss is a little bit late, so he never knows, and then here they, they say something that they shouldn't have and upset their kid, and they feel bad, but you generally find coping skills, and you want to come back to your homeostasis. Now, somebody who's struggling with symptoms, once you get above or below, this is where your symptoms occur, here and here. So this might be anxiety, hypervigilance, those kinds of things. This is the hyper arousal zone, right? Over aroused. Here you start to get sad, and once it moves here, this might be depression, isolation, suicidal ideation. This is the hypo, right? Or low arousal zone. This is where the problems lie, and this is where we need to use therapy and or medication to assist the client in getting these back into the range that we want to, right? We want to take these and essentially get them back up into here, okay? We don't want them to hit these. Now, the way that we do that is you can increase your window of tolerance. You think I'm bad at drawing. Look at the digital drawing. So you can increase your window of tolerance, right? So now you have this new, it's a dashed line, just imagine it. This new line, the line moves up. So now actually you could handle even this stuff here and be okay. Now you can also utilize medications, and that decreases the symptoms. So medications could maybe take this out, and therapy and learning new coping skills brings this up. And now you're good. You can deal with this, okay? So that's kind of what's going on. This is a lot. I hope this erase is easy. It does, good. Okay, so this is your window of tolerance. Your goal is to stay here is to stay in the middle here at homeostasis, okay? Once it gets above your window of tolerance, symptoms. Below, symptoms. Therapy can help expand your window of tolerance, and medications can help decrease your symptoms to get them closer in. I'm not promoting either or, okay? I'm promoting therapy. I think everybody should be in therapy. Even, I have been in therapy. Therapists, clinicians, everyone should have somebody to help them understand things in the world and help them process them and move through them better. But I'm not necessarily saying you do or do not need medication. That's a personal choice between you and your psychiatrist. Out of my lane. I think that it's useful in cases. I think that it's unnecessary in others, which, again, that's a healthy way to look at it. But so this is your window of tolerance, and this is the goal. You want to expand your window of tolerance so you can deal with more things. There's therapy expanding it. There's medication decreasing the symptoms. Boom, now we're within your window of tolerance. So something that you had happen before that you couldn't deal with, right? Maybe you had an event that occurred here. Before you couldn't deal with it. Now it's within your window of tolerance. So now you're all set. You can deal with that. You have positive coping skills that you can use, right? So this is the references if you want to look a little bit more at the REBT theory, as well as another resource online for REBT and CBT and the combination of rational, emotive, and cognitive behavioral therapy, and them coming together to form this rational emotive behavior therapy. So we will have another presentation coming up after this one that I forgot what it focuses on. It focuses on something called the LEAP approach. So this is going to be geared more towards, I think, people who are in the mental health field. I think it can be useful for someone who might identify more as a client or patient or whatever term you prefer, because you can understand what would be a good path for the person you're working with to take. To know, like, should they really be doing this? Should that, I'm coming in the first session, they want me to tell them in detail about a traumatic memory. That's not really the right approach, okay, in my opinion and many others. So the next presentation is going to just kind of overview an approach that I kind of created. Well, I took information that exists and kind of put it into a little package that helps me wrap my head around it well and helps me to explain it to my clients. So I usually explain to them, this is the roadmap that I'm going to have when we meet, but we can take all kinds of detours. There's no obligation to follow a certain path. There's no expectations, like you're the driver, right? This is just a map of one path that I've identified helps, but you can take us wherever you want to go, okay? Again, if you have any feedback, comments, questions, concerns, or if there's anything you notice, any discrepancies, please don't message me and tell me that Jan's name changed to Jill. I know I screwed up, okay? Give me a break. But if you have any other feedback, information, please go to the website, theanxiousmammal.com, go to the contact page, and you can leave me information there. And if you have questions, if you leave them there, I will get back to you. I'm very good at that. Probably my own anxieties make me have to answer you. So that works for you, terrible for me, but then you get the information you need. So any questions, comments, concerns, and then hopefully you'll join me for the next one, which will talk about my approach with working with clients on their trauma. And then we'll get into some coping skills as well.